Okay, now last time we spoke about climate change in one of these whiteboard sessions, I was just really covering how the science, if anything, is getting more and more certain as to what's going to happen when, and contrasting that really to how's that translating into political commitment. And essentially everybody agrees now that warming over 2 degrees, we enter into an era of what's called dangerous climate change. What they mean by that is that it's pretty unpredictable what might occur if the global temperature gets up to those sort of levels. So just on the 2 degrees then, how far towards that are we already? Well, we're at 0.8 is the world temperature increase since pre-industrial period. So we've got 1.2 to go. Now of that 0.8 that's been lifted, the temperature's lifted since the 1800s, 0.6 of it has occurred just in the last 50 years. So that's the acceleration. That's why the concern about it is that you haven't got necessarily all that much time before we're knocking on the ceiling here of the 2 degrees. So if we were to continue at the rate of the last 50 years, the 1.2 would only take us 100 years. And so that's why 100 years is not a long time before you're up at this point of view. So what's the canary in the gold mine and the mine here? What's actually telling us? What's the warning signal? Well, it's the carbon dioxide concentration in the atmosphere. So let's go to my split screen. It's very high tech now. And this graph here is carbon dioxide concentration at parts per million in the atmosphere. So if we go back to the 1800s and before, it was pretty steady at about 280 parts per million of carbon dioxide in the air. And then by 1990, we were up to 350, and right now we're up at 400, and the 2 degrees translates into about 450 parts per million. So once you get up to 450 parts per million in the atmosphere, then the scientific consensus is your 2 degrees has arrived. So another way to look at that we're interested in when that date might be, that we would get to the 450. That's where the sort of carbon budget idea comes from. And so we're we've got 250 billion more tonnes of carbon that we can put in the atmosphere before we get to that concentration. At the moment, the world is emitting 10 billion tonnes of carbon a year. So divide it, 25 years at this current rate. 25 on to 2015 is 2040. So that's had a huge impact, that sort of arithmetic, on governments agreeing now to targets to get the amount of emissions down from the 10 billion so that we can not take just 25 years, we can take a hell of a lot longer. And then of course we've got to stop carbon going in, because carbon's long-lived in the atmosphere, and if anything we then want to start taking it out. So it's a very tight timetable now when these goals have to be reached. So next session on this, I'm going to have a look at where we should be setting these targets for emissions, what the science is telling us we should do, and comparing that to what the politicians have agreed and declared as their targets. And then in the session after that, what we'll do is we'll look at comparing their targets to the strategies that they have in place to meet those targets. So, it's all sort of coming together, but time is running short before we get into this era of dangerous climate change.